Um, Up first today, we have Mr. Parker from Public Works. Wanting to discuss solid recyclables, collection, transfer, disposal services, among many other things. I'm sure. How are you doing today, Mr. Parker?
Good, how are y'all? Good afternoon. Mr. Adams asked me to come in and give a brief overview of the request for proposals for multiple contracts we have in solid waste. We'll go back just a little bit just to say that, make sure that everybody understands, we transfer everything. We don't have a landfill in Jackson County. You're probably aware of that. I just wanted to make sure the only landfill we have closed in the mid-90s. And we still manage that landfill down in Dillsboro as far as a closed landfill, but everything that we deal with is transfer. So last 20 plus years, we've transferred garbage to a site in Homer, Georgia, waste management landfill. So I'll just go through this document. There's some background information in here, some recycling tonnages, waste tonnages. I don't know if we want to go through all those or not.
I'll tell you what, before we jump through this, because this really is information for the board because solid waste or garbage is big business for Jackson County and a lot of other counties. And so before we just go through this, let's just talk about, just in general terms, what are the services? Let's just talk about our services in general, okay? So first of all, let's explain the SRCs. And this is for the board, but this is also for the public because half of the reason we're doing this is we're trying to notify the board and the public and also potential vendors if they're interested in this long-term process. So let's talk about a couple of things. Let's first of all talk about the SRCs.
Okay, we have what we call staff recycling centers throughout the county. There's 8 of those. We take garbage, of course, household garbage from your residents that have a dwelling on a piece of property in the county. We have a compactor there that they put that stuff in. We also have what we call a gray box, which is a 40-yard box that will take furniture, anything basically that's not construction debris. We don't take construction debris at our sites, but we will take mattresses, couches, just whatever household furnishing items that would come from a normal house. We also have a metal box that we can take any type of metal there, except for we don't take refrigerators, things that have refrigerant in them. They'll take those directly to the metal yard in Silva. In Cashers, unfortunately, they have to haul those all the way down, or if there's somebody up there that's willing to take those. But the refrigerant has to be removed out of those. If the refrigerant's removed before it comes to us, then we can take it. But it's kind of hard to verify those things unless it's totally obvious that it's been removed. The recycling that we do is we have a dual stream recycling program in Jackson County, which is fiber, which is all your paper, and then on the other end is containers, which is all your bottles and cans. And most sites, except for Dillsboro, take electronics, which is all your different type of electronics, computers, TVs, just various pieces of the computer components that you would have. And then we take oil, like motor oil, antifreeze, and we do take batteries, like alkaline batteries as well. They put those in a container, and we haul those and have those picked up by a recycler as well. Fluorescent tubes, the short ones, the 4-foot ones we take. The 8-foot ones are kind of hard to deal with, so we don't take those unless somebody can bring them directly maybe to the transfer station, and we can handle those.
So everybody's familiar with SRCs. So how are our SRCs? So our SRCs are contracted. So this will be part of the bids that are going out. What we did years ago, we have multiple contracts for solid waste. This is one of the contracts that we're bidding out. Years ago, we started consolidating these things and consolidating them in the sense of when the contract ends, so that we can combine them. And then sometimes you can get contractors to bid in scale. So ultimately, we may have a contractor who's going to bid on the services for the SRC, but they also may want to do other transportation within this contract. So by taking all of our individual contracts and making them do at the same time, the idea is hoping that we get more people interested because there's more volume, more monies associated with the contract. So right now, who operates our SRCs?
Republic Services provides the services for employees, the hauling services to the transfer station, and we lease equipment from them for our SRC sites.
So part of this bid will be bidding out for someone to operate our SRCs, provide us the compactors and equipment, and then also provide transportation from the site to
To the transfer station.
transfer station.
Yes.
Okay. And so that's a major part of this contract.
Yes.
Right? So how much is that? We were talking about that contract itself. How much is that generally annually for us now?
I'm going to quote this, the current year budget. What we have budgeted current year is $973,500 for just the service, and then there's an equipment lease of $107,800.
And so that is a component of this bid that's going to go out. And so now let's just talk about, we've got your general refuse, household refuse. The only exception to that is we do take construction debris at the cashier site. And that's just something. Is that part of this contract, the construction
Yes.
debris? So that is probably the only exception in regards to types of materials, is just because of the distance of the cashier's area. We do take construction debris there. So all this debris gets collected, brought into the transfer station. And then at the transfer station, let's talk about the different contracts that we're bidding out here from the transfer station. So where's the transfer station located?
It's on Mineral Springs Drive out in the Addy community there. I don't know if you're familiar with the log yard there, but if you go past that on Skyland Drive, it's right there by the Scotts Creek, the old Scotts Creek School. Turn down Mineral Springs, and it's right there on the left.
So from there, so your general garbage, your recyclables, all the materials that were just mentioned to you, plus a little bit of construction debris, is actually taken to the transfer station. Now, at the transfer station, we take other materials, and the other materials, just real quickly, that's not collected at the SRC is what?
We bring all the recycling materials that we collect at the SRC sites, and there's another facility there that used to be the old transfer station for the waste. We use that for the paper, and then there's a drop-off site beside that there's a trailer below the wall, and they dump the containers into that. Those two items end up going to Asheville for recycling.
So hang on. What I'm saying is what other garbage is taken at the transfer station besides what is brought in from the SRC?
Oh, garbage.
Garbage.
We take any kind of construction debris from contractors and other haulers that are in the county. There's probably 20-some private haulers that haul garbage in the county, but there's only probably 4 or 5 or 6 that have roll-off containers, but they bring in quite a bit of stuff from job sites throughout the county.
So primarily it's contractors and then garbage service where they're picking up dumpsters at commercial businesses, things of that nature that comes into the transfer station. So then part of this bid too is, let's talk about general garbage. And so currently general garbage, where is that taken to?
General garbage and construction debris go to Homer, Georgia, which is a waste management landfill. It's about 90 miles from our facility here, one way.
So
All down there by Randy.
By Kinsland Trucking, yes.
So part of this bid is, at this point, we do have potentially another landfill that's interested in submitting a bid through Republic Services out of Haywood County. Okay. So part of this is a comprehensive bid package. So part of this bid, it can be separate or combined. We're trying to make it where people can combine economies of scale, or if a business wants just one part of it, they can bid on that. So another part of this bid will be a bid from the landfills of what they're tipping, what we call a tipping fee, what they're going to charge us per ton to take our garbage and construction material. And then the second part of that conversation is, you mentioned to it, is the transportation, correct? So currently, we have a contract. So how much, do you know how much our contract right now for landfilling is?
Again, I would just go back to the budget from the current year budget, and the tipping fee amounts that we have budgeted are $919,100.
Okay, so that's general garbage and construction. That's what we pay Homer, basically.
Yes.
Correct, okay. And then part of this bid will be transportation. But before we get into transportation, let's talk about other materials that's general garbage construction. Talk about recycling. You started on that. Where does our recycling go?
Currently, our recycling goes to Asheville curbside recycling. In I can't remember exactly the street address over there, but it's going out 26. You turn out 26 north, and it's right off the road there. But all of our recycling, I say all of our recycling, the fiber and the bottles and cans. Those are the two items that end up there. They separate them out because we've had questions over the years of how does it get thrown away because it's all commingled together, and they have machines over there that separate everything out. Now there is some residual in that. I think ours is around 7%, which is stuff that gets probably thrown away out of the recycling. It's not a perfect. Everything that goes in there is not necessarily recyclable, but.
So at this point, this bid is going to, so we do haul there, but we're not looking to bid out that service at this point. So the recycling services is a little bit, as we were trying to look at it here, there's really only two places in Asheville that we really deal with. We've gone back and forth between those two. And, ultimately, when we come to you to award a transportation contract, we're not looking to move the recycling side because that really needs to be dictated by market and where the company is at the time. Those prices are very volatile, and so we need to have the flexibility to move that contract when necessary versus some 5 to 10 year contract. So we're currently talking about hauling our recyclables to this Asheville company, but we're not actually bidding out the recycling contract where we're delivering at this point. That is for a future conversation. Now, we do also haul tires.
Mm-hmm.
And so
we have a contractor. It's really the only contractor that's available to us in this part of the state, U.S. Tire Recycling. And they provide us with trailers at our transfer station. Basically what happens is somebody brings a load of tires in and they just stack those in that trailer. That trailer gets hauled to Concord, which is where their facility is located. But we also have some tire shops around the county that U.S. Tire will pay an individual to go around and pick those tires up and bring them to our location and stack them in the trailer.
So we're not bidding out where the tires are taken to. Okay, because there is no other place to bid it. But we are currently paying U.S. Tire for the transportation service, and that service is, the cost of that has started dramatically changing, so we are looking to see if there's interest, correct, for that service.
Yeah, and I did talk to, I think it was somebody from Iredell County, that there's somebody down east that could possibly be interested, but I don't know for sure about that.
So this is a little bit different specialty service, just so you know, as far as transportation goes, because if you heard, there is a part of it where they just load up the tires at the transfer station and take it to Concord, but we have some other specialty services where they also go around and pick up so that you try to handle these tires, especially people who utilize large volumes of tires. You try to handle them as least amount as possible before they're actually put on a trailer and hauled off. And so that's where Chad's talking about. We have some contracts where they go and literally pick up from each company. And so this gets a little bit more specialty than just transferring from our transfer station. And so that's where we may have a consolidated transportation bid, or we may have a smaller company that it's less transportation, but it's more labor intensive, working with our local businesses and meeting their needs as far as disposing of their tires. Is that the correct statement? And then, so then from there, is there anything else that I'm missing? Oh, metal.
Yeah, we do metal as well, but we don't take it to the transfer station. That goes directly to Metalwood, which is located on Skyland Drive, just past McDonald's on the right there. And that is Kinsland as well that operates that facility. So all of our metal that goes into the containers at the staff recycling centers ends up there. It goes directly there.
As far as bidding, that's not.
As far as bidding, I know you and I have talked about that. I don't see a real reason to possibly bid that because we don't have another facility in the county that I'm aware of that would be able to accept it the way he takes it. So I don't know that we're going to bid that at this time.
As long as he's giving us market prices for the metal, the big difference is we just don't want the metal to come to the transfer station and then have to re-haul it to somebody else. And so the reality is at this point, we're not, you never say never, but at this point, we're just not making this part of this bid package for the simple fact that that bid package would have to include taking into consideration whether or not somebody else has a facility, and it just complicates things at this point. So at this point, we're not bidding that service out. So now when we talk about bidding transportation, now we know that we transport our garbage, general garbage and construction garbage is either going to be to Homer or to Haywood County. We know that we transport recyclings to Asheville, and we know that we have a specialty transport of tires. And remember, I said special because of the extra services, transport to Concord. And so all those, so talk about that we're bidding all of those, correct?
Yes. So again, it's just a review. It's the hauling from our transfer station. Well, let's start from the SRCs. We're going to put out for bid if y'all approve, obviously, and that hauling from the staffed recycling centers to the transfer station. That would be one contract, which would also include staffing of the sites, and it would also include equipment that we would lease. And in that one too, as well, I didn't say it earlier, but we actually provide recycling containers for the schools. The county does. We got we've got grants in the past that we've been able to purchase those and supply the schools with the infrastructure to be able to recycle. Now they handle everything on the inside, and we just keep the can outside for them to be able to put the recycling in. So, and then we also have some recycle containers at our facilities here, like at the Justice Center, Department on Aging. Different facilities have, you can see that in the charts where we have different locations. So all that would be a part of that package from hauling. It's not just from the SRC sites. Then we talk about hauling from the transfer station to a landfill. Just as Mr. Adams said, we're looking at, I mean, there's always a possibility that there could be more people that would be interested, but we know of two that for sure that are within range for us to be able to haul to, which is Haywood or Homer, Georgia. And then the same thing for the recycling hauling from the transfer station to Asheville, which we're to curbside. Basically, we would just name that in the bid or in the proposal. Also, hauling or the landfill services themselves, we would contract with that whichever landfill that we chose to contract with. And there would be a contract between the county and the landfill. And then we'd have the scrap tire services contract as well. So I think that's all of them going through this.
Currently right now, that's all the contracts. So as you can see, there can be a myriad of how we get responses here. Obviously, there's only 2 responses for 2 landfills. But when that relates to the transportation costs should be significantly different between the 2 landfills because of mileage and so forth. So as you can see, that would be a myriad of choices when we're trying to evaluate the responsiveness of the bids. And then ultimately, generally speaking, the people who transport to the landfill, more than likely because of the similarity of the vehicles, more than likely will be very competitive for the transportation of the recyclables from the transfer station to Asheville. Okay. And so more than like, it shocked me if we had different transporters between those two. Just because economy of scale, that bidder will bid both, probably ask for both of those and give economy of scale. And then as far as transporting the tires, that one, the reason I keep pointing that out, since that's a little bit different, it would not surprise me if we had a separate transporter potentially for that one, just because we're asking for additional labor above and beyond transportation side of things. What we're attempting to do too, we are looking to go out with this bid fairly soon. We're not asking for any action, just if there's any questions from the board or any comments. Our contract end is at December 2023.
The end of this year.
End of this year. So we're really needing, so obviously we're what, 9 months from the end of the contract. We really need to get this process going so that we can allow people to be competitive, because if you're going to bid this, you're going to have the number of trailers available, all of that. You gotta, if we're trying to give people appropriate opportunity, okay, then we got to give them appropriate opportunity to gear up to actually provide this service. Yes, sir.
What's the length of the contract?
Going forward, or what we've had?
What the
Going
contract we're bidding out?
Oh, how long will the new contract be? Typically, what we've done is 5 years, and then maybe with an extension, to that,
Give us flexibility to move some of that if we.
and moving.
Well, I would. There's several options that's available besides putting them in a landfill. In the last couple of years, they've come up with some very, very clean incinerators that actually generate electricity and feed back on the grid. And they have small footprints, 40 by 60. I've done quite a bit of research into that. So it might be something we can look at, but obviously it's not a part of this conversation. It's a conversation going forward.
So not
No, sir.
within the contract period, because what'll happen is obviously they'll price everything out based upon that amount. But obviously, as we start evaluating those, we just need to include that in the long-term plan. The landfills, just so everybody knows, when we evaluate both Homer and Haywood, Republic and Waste Management, I believe, are the two operators, correct? So it goes beyond just whether or not they submit a bid. We'll be looking at their long-term life, their long-term sales available. Since we do not have a landfill ourselves, then obviously who we do business with, well, they need to insure us. The thing about this, John, is what we have to do is ensure we have accessibility for as long-term as possible. And so whenever we're evaluating alternative sites and things of that nature, that's the reason since I've been here, we have not bid out where we take it to, because we haven't really had a sustainable long-term site. And what happens is we're really buying capacity from these folks. And so I take all that in when you're researching and we're looking at alternatives, because what we have to do is any alternative we look at, we've got to look and make sure that they have long-term capacity and ability to receive, because if they can't prove that to us, if they can't prove that they have the sales available for us and that they can't guarantee our capacity with the contract, we say 5 years, but it's not unheard of to go longer than, we can't go more than 10 years, just so you know, but it's not unheard of to go longer than that, because we have to ensure that we have capacity for the garbage itself.
Is Homer's plant a Republic plant?
Waste management.
It's Waste Management. So Haywood is Republic. Is there a cost savings by contracting for transfers to and from those areas?
Well, that's what we're going to find out, because we're going to get a bid. We're going to get a tipping fee. What's going to end up happening is I think Homer's landfill is going to be cheaper than Haywood. But what we don't know, there is a significant reduction in mileage in the transport. But what I don't know is what that savings is going to be until we go through this process. And so the idea being is when we evaluate this, when we're evaluating Haywood County longevity, we're also evaluating longevity of how assured are we getting cheaper transportation costs and things of that nature. And then I also want to mention too, on transportation, when people submit their bids, we also have to evaluate them as a company, okay? You know, the reality is we want to be fair and open to people, but they also have to show us garbage does not stop. It cannot stop. Um, and so ultimately, when you start talking about consistency and longevity and things of that nature, um, you know, if somebody doesn't have a proven record or have, you know, a good history of large operate things of that nature, we have to evaluate that because we have to consider, you know, where they're going to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, whatever the contract is. And these are all things that we have to truly evaluate. If you look in here, we got insurance requirements, we got certain requirements when we look at their history. I encourage people to really look at this, and if they're interested, please inquire and look for bidding it. But you know, we talk about our current contractor. He's a proven commodity. How long have we used him?
More than 20 years.
So it's um, people don't think about garbage until they can't throw it away, and then it becomes a very serious issue for them. And so we just have to evaluate their longevity as far as their ability to provide service.
Yeah, there's a section in here for qualification of vendors, and it just talks about having been in these businesses and things of that nature. So,
And so things like, just for example, tippers versus walking floor trailers, okay? When they start trying to submit their bids, we have to have, is it, for some recycling, we gotta have, okay, is everybody familiar? A tipper is just a base trailer that when the garbage gets dumped, it's literally self-explanatory. It's tipped up and the garbage comes out. The walking floor trailer is a series of slats in the trailer that slide back and forth like that, and what it does is it literally moves the garbage off the back end. Okay, obviously that's a more expensive trailer than it is a more expensive trailer than your standard box. And so what happens here is there's a convenience factor for there's certain, like I say, recyclables, we do have to have the walk.
both recycling commodities would have to have a walking floor.
And so when a business comes in, if they're trying to get new in the business or new to us, you know, I hope they have enough experience to understand that they have to evaluate those costs versus tippers. Now, we are going to have access to tippers. Right now, currently, everything we use is walking floor trailers, which are more expensive. Now, we don't use it, our contractor uses it, but new bidders can come in and they could potentially bid multiple tipper trailers, which are less expensive long-term. These are all things that, if they have experience, then they should be able to give us a good bid. The last thing we want is somebody to undercut themselves. I mean, we don't want somebody to come in and go bankrupt in 2 years, right? We want experienced people who know how to evaluate all these things and evaluate long-term costs associated with it. And we want to get the best, cheapest price we can get, but we also want them to be sustainable and dependable.
Mr. Manager, the enterprise fund that we have that pays for that basically 2.1 million dollars between the hauling and the contract we have at our SRCs. That fund comes from the solid waste fund on our tax bills. Is that right?
Correct.
And we recently had to make some adjustments in the last year. Commissioner Stribling would remember to increase the solid waste fund on our tax bill to cover for the gas prices, increased gas prices, and other costs associated. So that and I'm just kind of educating and reminding myself and the citizens that enterprise fund has to be self-sustaining. Correct?
Yes, sir.
So, and we had to raise, and I voted for it, but I didn't like having to raise the solid waste funds on our 2 and 3 bedroom homes. But that was the bulk of the homes in the county. If you went with higher, there was far fewer homes in the more than 4 bedrooms, say, and therefore the tax solid waste fund would have been a lot higher for those 1,600 homes, if I remember in that 4+ bedroom range. So, and we don't know how much money we might save if Haywood's, because we don't have a bid yet, right? And if we did have savings, could we consider proposing that back to and lowering that solid waste fee? All right, and then secondly, Ms. Fox probably might know this, but how much do we get in recycling money?
It varies. Usually it's around $100,000 for the metal, and the other, it can range from 200 to 400,000.
So we get significant monies from that recycling. It's a worthwhile program, and to the tune of quarter to $500,000.
The recycling, like paper and commingled containers, varies greatly. I mean, it could go up really high, but it also, I've seen a time where you might get $20,000 a year. So it's just a very volatile market. I mean, recently it's been fairly level. Anyway, I just want to make sure
Don, if you'll give the viewers some knowledge, why do we, and maybe Chad too, why do we not have our own landfill in Jackson County? Why was that? I mean, of course it, excuse me, of course it probably filled up in the late 90s, but of course it's cleaner for the county. But I've had that question come to me, why do we not have an area in Jackson County that we take our own trash? Why do we ship it out?
So I can give you, but you have the direct.
I can tell you the background as to possibly why. Doesn't necessarily answer the question completely, but the background on solid waste was back in like
92.
99. We had an agreement with a neighboring county to use their landfill for our waste, and that agreement fell apart, and we ended up having to make a decision rather quickly to do something with our waste. So transferring it was a much easier build as far as a facility. And then and the other thing is we looked, part of our agreement with that other county was we were going to accept a C&D over here into a landfill, a C&D landfill, which is a lesser landfill at the time. It didn't have to have a liner or anything. And we couldn't even find a place for that looking around everywhere we went. So it was very hard to site one. Plus there was a time constraint on trying to get things going as far as hauling. We actually ended up using we had a transfer station during all that period of time. And what ended up happening is in 2003, we decided to use our smaller transfer station and funnel everything through that, recycling garbage. Of course, they still went to different places, but we were having to funnel it through that small one. Then we built a new transfer station around 2009, and it's much larger than what you see up there today. I can't answer, but that's the history of kind of where we're at.
That's what I
Chad,
want.
do you know when the last landfill was closed? Do you remember?
1994. It was mid 90s.
It should be early 90s. The reason I mention that, I'm going to give you a little bit more background. I was in school at the time, and this actually was part of my academic studies, was the change of state laws in regards to legislation as far as how landfills are ran. And in approximately 90 to 92, all landfills had to be lined. So what had to happen is, and they didn't just start in 92, they started years before that, all communities had to make a decision on whether or not they were lined, meaning you got to have, at the bottom of the hole, you got to have a liner in it and to be able to capture the leachate and so forth. And so a lot of communities, most communities, basically chose, once they evaluated under the new regulations on how landfills had to be built, most communities, they could not build them like Dillsboro's built now or things of that nature. Most communities opted to move towards transferring versus build out. That, along with the political nature, nobody wants a landfill near them. And so going through the massive increase in cost of building a landfill, along with the new, associated with the new regulations, along with the politics behind it, this county went through what a lot of counties went through when they closed their landfills and went to transfer station.
I just want to make it clear to the public why that happened.
Yeah, that was a federal, in the 90s, it was a federal regulation that came down, Subtitle D, landfills were required to be lined. So we didn't have that, so we closed ours down, went into agreement with the neighboring county, and then then that fell through.
I mean, it keeps our county cleaner, I guess. So.
I want to go back to Commissioner Smith just a second about the contract length. I mean, I suppose we could set it up, to have a termination agreement in there. I guess typically what Don was saying too is 5 years.
There's a bit of incinerator type thing set up.
Right. So it's as far as 5 years is, and that's the other reason I was going to say is like at least the 5 year range, because if someone has to buy all the equipment, they'll want to stay in that for at least a decent amount of time to try to pay for their
I think
equipment.
there's 2 or 3 operating incinerators in counties up in North Carolina.
Mhm.
They're starting to pop up more and more in other states. Even California has a few of them. They're very clean nowadays, and they feed quite a bit of electricity back to the grid, and gives the county a little money back. They're expensive to set up initially, but
And going back to the revenues we get from recyclables, just because we're having general comments and people know, we have a mixed stream. Right? If you recycle, you see how convenient it is to go in. I've got my own little system set up where I got a bag of my paper and my cardboard, and then I have my bag of everything else, and then I just go in and dump it. And ultimately, that does not give you the highest price per item versus if you separated it out. But I would not. I came from an area where everything was separated. It's labor intensive. It also made recycling much more difficult for the citizen. Okay. And ultimately, it just wasn't convenient. And so I believe we got less recyclables because it was less convenient. But I also let people know, because we're sending mixed recyclables, okay, then there is a cost associated with that. And so we just got to let everybody know that we do pay for convenience.
there's electronic recyclables going.
Powerhouse Recycling in Charlotte. And that's what I was going to say. There's 3 contracts that we've talked about this, but 3 contracts that are not
I haven't heard that one yet. So
electronics, metal, and the MRF itself for recycling, accepting the facility that would accept our recyclables. Those are 3 that we're not looking at in this document.
And
And-
in electronic recyclables, you can only go to certain facilities and
We have to use certain vendors that the state, as a matter of fact, we piggyback off the state contract on that one.
because there's chemicals
And they have to be vetted so that they know that they're properly disposing of the materials that are derived from those electronics. The other thing, just a little background on the recycling. For years, I think it was the 80s too, probably around, well, I guess when we opened the transfer station, Webster Enterprises did that for the county, and we paid them yearly fee to actually separate recyclables, and they did that down at the where the Green Energy Park is located now. The high roof that you see down there, that was part of that facility. Just so you have the background on that. And then once we started commingling things, it was mainly from a restrictive point of the facility that we had, so we could combine things to be able to handle them more efficiently. And it is efficient because we don't touch them. They go from the generator person, the residential person that goes in and puts that in that box, that gets dumped out, gets straight into a trailer and goes to that facility and is dumped out. So we don't even touch the material at all. So it's an efficient operation. Also, we did have the state a few years ago that they were pushing single stream recycling. And as I told you before, even in our double stream, we still have some residual trash in that. What they found, they were trying to push that for many years. They found when you get to single stream, people just started throwing everything in it, and it became trash, basically. And they started kind of backing off. So we didn't go that route. We just kept our dual stream, and that has worked out fairly well for us to have a decent product. It's not the most valuable product, but as far as what we have to put into it, because if you look at other counties, they operate their own MRF facilities, and they have to have staff. You have to have all that equipment to separate those materials to gain that extra value for those materials.
I do want to commend Chad and Miss Baker too. She'd worked on this before she had left and put a lot of work into the product so far. We're going to be tweaking it here in the next few weeks and then set up the timeline. The whole goal is to have a process where people, companies who are bidding have months to basically, when they bid, they would have months to prepare to take the contract over if they were the low bidder. So we're trying to get as best we can ahead of this so that we're not rushing. Plus supply chain issues too. We really need to, I think we're thinking in terms of at least 6 months, right? That we're giving them as we
Hopefully
go
we can give them 6 months.
6 months. And so that we're taking into consideration supply chain issues and just giving them time to appropriately prepare themselves if they're the low bidder. And again, I appreciate Chad putting a lot of work into this to prepare it. This is a complex issue, and when you come in and we start looking at the bids and we're comparing everything, this will take us several weeks to go through and vet and make sure that we're making the recommendations that best suit and fit the needs of Jackson County.
Yeah, I'll say I appreciate Ms. Baker, and I know Angie read through this as well for me, so I appreciate that. Appreciate everybody involved in it.
One question for Don. Since these are several different bids, will they be approved at your level or will they come? Okay.
Anything
I
over,
know
yeah.
At a certain level, you can approve on your own, so this didn't know
Since-
what the level was.
yes, sir. Since they're multi-year contracts, it'll all be brought back to this board and everything will be approved by this board.
And these are basically what's called service contracts, so they're not necessarily in the realm of construction bidding and things of that nature, but what we put forth is what we go by as far as those bid process.
Our attorney's online here, just so everybody knows, so I know I butcher the law here, but this is simplistically how I understand it myself. Since it's a service contract, we don't actually have to bid this.
No.
We could go and find a vendor and we could, because it's certified, I understand, sir, but I'm talking about law, what could be done. So the only rules associated with this process are the rules that we put onto ourselves. So the rules associated with this bidding process are the rules that we legally have to abide by. So
Is this the past contract based on calendar year, seeing that it expires in December? And if it is it just by chance, or would it be better to have this future contract on our not fiscal budget timeframe? I'm just curious.
well, the previous contract dates have been all over the board, meaning some budget, some calendar. I'd have to give a little thought to that. It really would need to be, 4 months? It'd need to be not quite decent. I guess it works well to where if you're not assuming the new cost, see, July 1 is not necessarily as long as we're notified what the new costs are 3 months prior, we need to know right now what the costs are in July. That's how we're able to put the budget together for you. So if we can line things up to where we know what the new costs are, that's what's really important. So ultimately, when you look at like CPI increases and things of that nature, that doesn't necessarily line up when the actual date starts. It lines up 2 or 3 months prior. And as long as if we set it up like that, I guess the point where we make this like a 5.5 year contract versus a 5-year contract. And then if we built some things in to where we knew what the additional costs were, annual costs before July 1, then that would be beneficial. I'm talking about like CPI increases and things of that nature.
Any additional questions?
Thank you.
Moving on now to Mr. Adams, County Manager Adams, to go over domestic violence shelter and the proposed great grant agreement.
Yes, sir. So as briefly discussed in my budget or manager's report last meeting, do have good news in regards to the domestic violence shelter. Before I jump to that news, I just provided the information you've already received before. So you do have the updated proposed site plan. This is where we're looking at Plum Street. Just to remind everybody, Cookout is about right here where my pointer is, and then 107 is where my pointer is. Ultimately, with this revised plan, what we were looking to do is after we went through our, our planning process with Center for Domestic Peace, it was determined that we really needed around 8,200 square feet. And you do have included in here, I did try to show you the difference between the 7,000 square foot facility rooms versus 8,200 square foot facility. So as you recall, adding that additional space made the rooms a little bit bigger. It also allowed us for 2 additional rooms versus 8 resident rooms. We have 10 resident rooms going in with that additional space. As you can see, the proposed square footage is 8,279 square feet, and the estimated cost of total cost of 4.6, $4,649,000. This was higher than the original budget. It was presented at 7,000 square foot facility, and so if I go back to the next attachment, attachment 2B, that is the wrong 2A, 2A2. What I'm including in here is the current budget, and the current budget, as you can see, you can break down. We'd already had some planning dollars put into the homeless shelter. We had received $2,174,498 from Dogwood, and we were matching it with the ARPA funds of $2,174,498 approximately. This was the budgeted amount. And it's really 4.3 million minus the 28,000 for the amount available. And then if you go to the next attachment, what you can see here is we do have a letter from Dogwood. The letter from Dogwood is stating that they're willing to put in an additional $174,500. And so that increases their $2.174 million grant to $2,348,997. And so what is being requested is that the board accept these funds and that we move forward. Right now, for the budget to work out for the estimate, it would require the board to match this $174,500 with another approximate $174. It's actually $164. They put in a little bit extra than what the original dollars were. Okay, but we will take $174. And so, what I would request would require some matching funds to this $174,500, which is a little bit less to get us to that $4.6 million now estimated construction budget. So ultimately, the request for the board for the upcoming meeting is to a couple of things. Is to accept the additional funds, to vote to proceed forward with the 8,200 square foot facility, and also to move forward with the understanding that we would look to match these funds out of ARPA funds. And if you recall, we do have available funds. I don't have that. I'll bring that back in front of you. But during our budget planning session and so forth, we do have additional ARPA funds that are undesignated that can go towards this project. So it's good news. I'm very appreciative to Dogwood. This isn't a new grant award. This is just a contract amendment. And the contract amendment, they just added an additional $174,500 to our grant award.
Is there any questions from the board? I think there's consensus to move forward with this project.
Yes, sir. Okay. Ready for the next? So the next item is the proposed great grant agreement. And what I do have enclosed in your package is the latest version, and as soon as I put this in the packets and posted it online and printed it, they gave us the final version, by the way. But this does show you from the last version that we gave you the changes that were made. And ultimately, I'm comfortable with all the changes have been made. It all lines up. The final version basically does have everything filled out, the grantee name, Spectrum, even though everybody here knows it's Charter, the company is Spectrum that we're working with. And so we do have the final document out with all the information involved. What I would refer everybody to is this next attachment on the great grant, which I believe it's the Exhibit J, because this Exhibit J, what I tried to do was just, even though we're part of the three-party agreement, that multiple-page document I just showed you, we really, that we don't really have a lot of choice in that particular document. NCDIT is taking all the responsibility. They're the ones who are basically providing oversight for the multi-million-dollar grant that they're giving for the actual implementation and things of that nature. For us, if you recall, we're matching up to 7.5% and the company was going to match 7.5. We're technically less than 7.5% because their award is a little over $4 million. The company was Charter was okay with us just remaining at the original $300,000 that we had all initially agreed to. So here it really just shows you what our obligation is. Jackson County is contributing $300,000 of matching funds to Spectrum Southeast as part of this project. The county is using ARPA revenue replacement funds for this match. The $300,000 is intended to assist matching funding for a minimum total project cost of $4,497,486. So when you see the grant agreement, the grant is around 3.8 from the state, and then 300 from us, and the remaining amount is from Spectrum themselves because they had to put some matching dollars there too, and it'll serve a minimum of 1,156 locations in the county. What's key for us is that this next section, the funds will be mailed or wired to Spectrum Southeast in full within 30 days after the grantee has completed the scope of services and the described Exhibit B of the three-party agreement. And the grantee, NCDIT, provides the county with evidence that NCDIT has approved the grantee's final claim as described in Exhibit F. What I did is I went back to all the exhibits to the main. What we're doing is we're the last dollar, is what we are. And so in order for Spectrum to receive their last payments, they have to have the grantee's final claim as described in Exhibit F, and they also have to have the scope of services done. You can see that the grantee will request that NCDIT notify the county of this final claim approval. The grantee will also request that NCDIT provide the county a copy of final report along from the end of construction period as described in Exhibit F. So ultimately, they'll be at the very end. They'll have to follow all the reimbursement protocol from the state. If you go back and read that first document, start looking at the attachments, you'll see that there's just a lot of protocol in. And then at the very end of this, when they get their final claim and their final report, and that's when they can submit to us, and then that's when we will distribute our $300,000. Didn't quite figure out whether or not we're going to do mailing or wiring, so we just said we'd figure that out when they give us the final claim for the $300,000. And so the request is, Mr. Chairman, is that I would put the final three-party agreement on the upcoming Tuesday agenda, and then also that would include this Exhibit J that describes how we will contribute and partner in this project.
Questions? I think there's consensus to move forward with this as well on our next budget. Or on our next meeting, sorry.
Thank you.
Go now to, well,
I'm missing here. Okay. Yes, sir.
Ms. Fox and Mr. Adams for budget request summary and schedule.
Okay. I'll recognize Ms. Fox. So just to remind you, boys, she's coming at the end of that. as she's handing this out to you, um, this is a summary of this isn't a detailed line item, but we're trying to show you a summary of new personnel requests, summary of capital improvements, and things of that nature. In the next couple of weeks, Ms. Fox and I will be meeting with all of these individuals with the details, going over all this information. And if any changes in the request occurs, we'll bring it back at the May meeting to let you know. But I'll turn it over to Ms. Fox.
What I did was all the requests coming in from the departments, I just pulled this information straight from the request. The first item is the capital outlay detail. We request that they give us 5 years. So this is year one of every item each department asks for. The total for the equipment was $2,300,993.25.
These are department heads' requests.
That's correct.
We could, if we so choose, can make adjustments.
Yes, this is their request. Like Don said, we'll be meeting with them starting next week. We'll discuss all these items and then get the board's input on it too.
So what happens at the end of this? I'm gonna go remind you. I have the budget calendar in here also. So if you go back and I believe at the beginning I mentioned to everybody when we gave you the budget book. If you wanted a real quick summary of the budget, I always recommend reading the manager's budget message. What I do is I break each one of these categories down and I describe to you in the capital budget what capital is awarded, and I highlight that. And then I highlight personnel recommendations. So if its personnel recommendation is not in my budget message to you, then it's not. I guess my point is keep this book, because once you see my budget message recommendation, you can refer back to this book, and if it's not specifically identified in that recommendation, then it's not recommended. Doesn't mean you as a board can't change it, add, take away, things of that nature. I'm just trying to give you the roadmap of how to distinguish between request and what's being recommended.
And you can see this includes the motor vehicles too for each department.
Just so everybody knows, for today, we're giving this information to you practically. When did you receive it?
I got my last one last Thursday.
So we're literally spending after this week, the next 2 weeks, we're in meetings all day, every day, and we're going through all the details, having discussions about all of this. This is really the point of this exercise. It's just to get this in your hands as soon as we get it. And then right now, if you had I know about a lot of this, but a lot of this I may not be aware what it is or what the justification is, because I haven't had a chance to sit and talk to the department heads at this point.
And if you see anything in here you want us to talk with the departments about, please let us know.
One of the things that stands out is we have a lot of different, some departments are using iPads, some are using Surface Pros. Will those be compatible with our new code enforcement software and all that? So either iPad or Surface Pro it doesn't really make a difference. It's just preference.
It's preference, but the code enforcement wants the iPads.
Right.
And everybody else wants the Surface Pros.
There's a web browser.
Yeah, it's on the cloud, so.
Yeah.
Should be fine.
But all of those items that's in here is for the new software system.
Okay.
And by the way, the software system is not in these numbers. Okay, but they need to be divided. It can be split up, whether or not all of it's capital or not. But so just so you know, on top of these numbers, we do still have that software request.
Okay.
The next item is capital improvements. This is any improvements throughout the county. The first sheet is what we fund from general fund. And this comes through public works budget. We've broken it out in areas like cashier's area, sheriff and jail, and then various other sites, buildings and recreation. So the total on the capital improvement for that is $1,564,000. And the next page is what we usually fund through Conservation Preservation Recreation Fund. And it's also broken out by site.
Ms. Fox, this capital improvement plan detail, these pages, they're also department head requested.
Yes, they are. So you see, that's a lot more than what we have available.
Right.
Yeah, that, like I say, this is the first time I had it. Like that 4,000 square foot expansion and cashiers, that really is not going to be part of this fund. That'll be pulled out and put into our major CIP conversations versus these. So just, again, just remind everybody, we're taking their department heads and we're consolidating them in a consumable format. And then we go through and make recommendations and move the request into the appropriate categories and things of that nature. So even here, you can look, you see that trail match of $500,000. We need to keep that on our radar, but that more than likely won't hit us for I know it's not next year. It'd probably be the year. I'm trying to
Year
remember what
after.
year. So ultimately, we will realign these requests in the appropriate year and things of that nature. So
And then the third page is a Greenway Fund. So the total of all the capital improvements that have been requested equals $7,753,800. The next is personnel request, and this again is what each department has requested for any changes within their department. We list the department, the current classification, their current grade and step, the current salary, and then their proposed classification with the new grade and steps. And then the difference that it would take to fund it and the percentage of change. And any new position that's highlighted is, again, the direct request from the department. The cost of all of the differences in the departments would be $1,555,609. And all of this is in addition to what we had discussed earlier at the retreat for the step increase in cost of living adjustment.
Moving on to nonprofits.
This is a listing of all the nonprofit grants. This is the notebooks that we have available for you. And I thought about putting them on a flash drive for you, but you might.
It loses its weight. Literally,
it
to
does.
do that.
It does. So that's why we got the books. We didn't have any new requests for grants this year. We did have some that requested additional funding. And then we have the schedule It's the budget schedule that the board had adopted earlier.
So, and I had that up on the screen. So as you can see right now, you can see that when the requests were due, and then what finance office is doing in these couple of weeks, that they're organizing large amounts of data, putting them in consumable fashions, trying to organize this. And you can see in the next couple of weeks, April 17th through 28th, myself and finance officer will meet with all the departments and agencies. We go over this information, line items, programs, things of that nature. Well, once that happens, then, there will be changes. There's clarifications. This is not a black and white. They submit one request and that's it. There's conversations to be held. And as Darlene and I meet with all these individuals, sometimes there's better ways of doing things. Sometimes you put things off. Sometimes there's just a whole series of things that potentially change as we go through this process of making recommendations and so forth. So you can see that the May 9th, I'll jump down here, that's when a version of this document will come back to you at the work session, just to let you know if any of this has changed. Okay, and it will have there'll be things that we didn't pick up in the budget request that when we're sitting down there, they'll say, hey, what about my 3 cars I asked for? And I'm using it as an example, and it's because they tucked it way down at the bottom of the request and it didn't get picked up on correctly. Or it may be things that we've already funded, or maybe things that sometimes that, at the year end, we can fund smaller capital and we may remove from here. There's various reasons. Sometimes it's just not recommended. There's various reasons why these items change one way or another by the time it gets back to you. And then you can see that the May 9th, we would present that. Going back to May 1st to May 5th, finance officer has to have time to make changes. We're still updating revenue projections. All that is still going on at that time period. You can see May 8th to the 12th, that's really when Darlene and I are finalizing things. And then if you look at the 16th, it's when the actual recommended budget comes to you. And that's the entire budget document in regards to line items, capital, things of that nature. And so you can't, we're really done. We're fine when it says May 8th to May 12th. Darlene's wanting that a lot sooner than 12th. And so while we're putting all this together, it's around mid that week is when things are finalized and we're really putting it in a document form where it can be presented to you. And then May 16th, it gets presented to you. And then ultimately, again, the way we try to do that budget book is I try to associate it with this summary so that you can easily go back and see what's in, what's out, programs, things of that nature. And then ultimately we come back May 23rd, and normally that's when some of the larger folks, you do have that meeting scheduled. That's when the sheriff will come to you, education, maybe some departments. It depends on, we already had the code enforcement, they'll come to you for that software, so I probably wouldn't have them come back unless y'all had any specific questions. But those would be days that they come and present. And then you do have a public hearing on the June 6th. And remember, if you make changes, you don't have to have a public hearing again. The public hearing really is based upon that May 16th presentation. And then after that, it's your budget at that point. Darlene and I are spectators to see what you wish to do with the budget. And then you can see we've got 8th and 9th scheduled, but in the middle, if there's any questions, concerns, anything you want research done, please let us know.
I do have a question on the capital outlay. Do we have an aging report for computers that are going to be replaced? Or
Yes, we do.
could
we
you
do.
just email that to me? I'm a techie.
Yeah.
I like looking at that stuff.
Now, when you say
We've
an
got it
aging,
by department.
Okay, thank you.
Questions from the board?
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fox. Carrying on now with other business, proposed North Carolina HS Children and Family Specialties Plan.
So, Mr. Chairman, I'm gonna ask you to participate with me in this conversation as much as you are pleased to do so, because, as you all well, aware, and for the public on this, that the chairman and myself, we both serve on the regional VIA board, and this information being presented today is in regards to proposed North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services Children and Family Specialty Plan. This is actually not a new concept or plan or action that's being debated or discussed amongst our state legislature. This came up last year, and this really all centers around child welfare issues, how they're handled and dealt with through social services, and how these children are able to get access to mental health and or other services needed as they're being cared for or treated or provided service to. This is really what it really boils down to, and what's happened in the past handful of years. And before I even start going through all this language, is that ultimately placement of children has become extremely difficult. When I say placement, when you have a child that has different needs, let's just say a child has been removed from the home for, let's say there's some action that goes through social services, some action where the parent is adjudicated, and somehow or another that child care comes under the responsibility of social services, one way or another, whether it be site visits or eventually trying to place them in some type of services for mental health or some type of home or things of that nature. What has occurred in the past multiple years is access to those services has become extremely difficult to obtain. This is something that the last regional meeting we had, our DSS director, Chris Weatherford, actually, he and I drove down together, and since it's in Franklin, Mark just dropped off the mountain up that way off of 64, I think. And so it really, through the years, what's happened is it's really become a debate upon whether or not is this a local issue, like a social services issue, is it a mental health issue, VIA, and VIA is the LME MCO for our area. They administer the Medicaid dollars, or a service provider issue, whether it be like Appalachian Health or Meridian, or is this a state issue? Meaning, is the state not providing enough services? And so, in my opinion, and this isn't a VIA opinion, by the way, you'd be hearing a different explanation if VIA was here or a mental health service provider was here. For me, I think it's a little from a state and access to services. It's a little bit of both. And what I mean by that is quite frankly, I just think most of what we're talking about here does not address issues we're dealing with. And I'm going to go straight to a letter here. And bear with me if you may. I'm going to point something out. Excuse me. Yep. I think it may be this. VIA had put this together. What this is talking points in regard. So basically what's happening is currently, let me give you a little bit more background. Currently, right now, mental health, children and family services through Medicaid are really handled to some extent through VIA. Okay. And then VIA, these state dollars flow through VIA, and then VIA's responsibility is to help try to find the services that are needed for these children. They don't provide the service, they have to contract with the services these children are needed. And our operations like social services, but it goes beyond us, like Awake and other organizations, they have to attempt to try to access these mental health services. So VIA Help, right now, what the state is saying is the state is coming out with a potential plan that they wish to have a single provider or single point of service statewide. Okay, so what they're looking to do, instead of having a VIA, there's other entities like they used to be called Smoky that are across the state. So instead of having a regional service, they're talking about having a statewide service where maybe a Blue Cross Blue Shield or somebody responds to a request for proposals And so instead of social services dealing with VIA or somebody here to try to help and get the kid that they're trying to get services for, they would be dealing with a larger company. And this is where VIA really does not agree. And to a lot of extent, I wouldn't recommend it either, because we're talking about dealing with a larger entity versus a regional entity where we know them. And so currently, right now, the state is considering going to that type of process and receiving requests for proposals. And this is what VIA Health has given us to talk about talking points about why we should not do that. It gives you a little bit of history and so forth. My intentions are not here to read everything. It talks about the impacts of the Senate bills and the House bill. But what I want to do is scroll down. And when you start talking about why it's not the right solution, the first bullet point here is I absolutely agree. It does not solve the primary challenges of affecting this population, which is lack of foster care families, provider workforce shortages, bed availability, funding shortfalls. So when you look at the primary issue, so like you take our social services, we have sometimes kids sleeping in our social services department. When we're responsible for these children, we're responsible for these children, meaning social services are responsible for them. And so when these children, and a lot of them are they have high intensive needs, okay? When they're not services available, i.e. beds to facilities to provide service, or the appropriate foster home. Not all foster homes can take care of all children. There are different levels of foster home. Then, until that service can be found, they are the social services responsibility. And so, what I absolutely agree with this whole conversation is, in my opinion, none of this is really addressing the real issue. And the real issue at this point, whether it's VIA doing it or a Blue Cross Blue Shield doing it or state, is the funding that's necessary or the services out there. Lack of mental health beds, lack of services, things of that nature. Right there, that's where I'm at. So ultimately, VIA Health has given us talking points about why this is not good, and they've requested that your chairman, our chair, Mark Lutson, write a letter with the county letterhead, which would have all your names on it. And anytime we send out a letter with all your names on it, it's general policy that we come and discuss it with the board. And what they're asking is that we write a letter opposing this plan from the state that really is going to some type of single provider plan, when VIA believes that they can do a better job because they're a regional program and because they've already established connections and things of that nature. I agree with all of that, all the way up to, let's go to the next attachment, and the next attachment is a letter written by the VIA board, in which Mark and I actually voted in favor of, but it was from the board, not from the commission. So from the board, making points that we agree with the VIA board. And then if you go to the next letter, the next letter is actually a response from the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. And it's actually written to the LMEs and the MCOs, the VIAs of the world. And ultimately, if you go through and read this letter, it's really defending the process of the potential of going to a single provider. And the reason it's defending it is basically saying because what we're doing is not good enough. But what's ironic about this for me is when you go through and look at some of the points, which are all valid points from the secretary, since 2021, we've seen no improvements in number of children, adolescents going into emergency department across the state. Inpatient stays for children that become longer. Lengths of stays have increased. We've seen a decrease in number of children served by treatment foster care. These are all they're important factors, and they're actually elements that all need to be approved upon. But if you don't have, and really this is a comment on the LME's performance, is what it is. But I still think it misses the point if the LME could have all the money, well, not all the money in the world. If there's not service providers out there, if there's not a facility to send these children to, then this, in my opinion, where the state is not really recognizing is they're not investing in the appropriate areas. I guess that's where the point is on this.
It doesn't matter who we give money to, LME or MCO or United, Blue Cross Blue Shield, whoever it is, whoever the provider is. If there's not a place that we can get these kids to, it serves no purpose to change. So until that infrastructure is in place,
Well, several years ago, it's probably 11 years ago, North Carolina passed a law that limited the funds per child that could be given to some of these places. And several nonprofits that were providing these services closed down because they could no longer afford to provide beds and places for those. A nonprofit that was in Waynesville, my wife worked for at the time, they had to close their operation down. They still have an operation down in Myrtle Beach, but they just couldn't make it work here after they changed that law. And I will say that some of this stuff is going to change. Family First Preventive Services is not going to replace this, but it's going to intermingle with some of this, and that's coming down now. And actually, Jackson County DSS is going to be one of the first DSS agencies that it's being presented to. They're still in the phase of defining exactly what that's going to be.
Yes.
They're still in the draft mode, but supposedly it's supposed to be finalized by May, and they're going to start teaching it and showing them how to do it and stuff in May at Jackson DSS. My wife's the Region 1 ref, so that's the reason I know that.
and one of the problems I see by going larger is instead of, we're forgotten most of the time in the western portion of the state. VIA is in Cherokee Clay, Jackson, Swain, Haywood, Transylvania. I think they're in 36 counties total, correct?
They go all the way up. It's almost all of what we would consider Western Carolina.
And removing that at least piece, it without a doubt, it's going to get redistributed to Charlotte, Mecklenburg, Gastonia, Raleigh, and the Triangle. So we're hurting ourselves by not keeping it at a regional level.
Well, I know for a fact, Haywood County right now, they have a child placed with a family member down in Florida, and once a month they have to fly a worker down there to do the visitation and back. Yeah. That's an expense that Haywood County has to foot because it's not in the state plan to do that.
So the request from VIA is for this board to approve a letter. That's the last attachment. Now, that's written to the secretary, but it's actually intended to go to the secretary, to the governor, and to all of our legislators that really is opposing this process for some type of single point provider, opposing the Senate bills that I quickly showed you at the beginning that was going to go through this process of trying to create a single provider of these services. And they're asking that this board authorized Chairman Letson to sign off a letter opposing this to all of our legislators. They gave a sample letter here, which makes all the same points. And again, as I'm just not reading it verbatim, you go back and read it. If you got any questions, please come back and let me know. The only thing I would recommend, and Mark, you and I briefly talked about this, is just adding a section in here, because this is going to our legislators of saying you need to go back and revisit it. We believe that we're more effective working regionally, the point you were just making, because a larger region, Chris, if you look at our DSS director, what he will tell you is that even though he may not always get the services he needs with VIA right now, at least he can contact them and he can communicate at this point. And so I believe the recommendation would be to oppose this bill, but also I would add some language in here about letting our legislators know that the services as a whole, specifically like the example you're giving, that we're funding these beds and these services need to be, because none of this is really addressing the problem. All they're talking about is who's going to run a system that's not working. And that would be the only thing I would, if the board wanted to move forward with a letter approving the bills, the only recommendation I would do is add some language in there, just adding that there needs to be additional funding put in there, and they need to go back and address the real issues, which are lack of beds, lack of services, things of that nature.
Any questions from the board?
I haven't asked any of our state representatives their position on this. Has any of us?
One and the same.
Without speaking, for them, I think that Senator Corbin is for this plan. I mean, that's
For
keeping it regional versus, and I believe Mike Clampett is as well. I don't know about Mr. Gillespie or Representative Pless. I'm trying to think of any others that would be within that via bubble, and that would probably be about it. But even Senator Corbin was supposed to be at our meeting and wound up missing, and was positive in let's try and keep it regional. So
If we have an opportunity to communicate with any of them, and please try and bring this subject up and and we'll share that what we hear. I'll do the same.
I believe there's a consensus to move forward with this.
Okay. I'll go back and work on a little bit of the language, just a paragraph or two in here. Really, at the end, just emphasizing the point of it's just not addressing any of this is not addressing the real issues there.
You gotta look at the letter before we actually approve it.
Yeah.
Next week, I mean, a
Yeah.
day ahead of time or
Yeah.
something.
Great. Is there any other business today?
No, sir. And I did have a closed session, but I'm going to wait till next Tuesday for a closed session.
No other business. We are adjourned.
Wait. I'm sorry. We do have one.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Yes. Huh? Now I'm going to turn this over to our Steve Finance.
Coming back with Miss Fox.
This is an item for next Tuesday. As everybody knows, on vehicle purchases, we've had trouble getting vehicles since COVID. So the sheriff's office had pre-ordered some vehicles, and I brought a budget amendment to you a couple of meetings ago for 2 of them. Well, last week they delivered 5 more. And that will be part of the 8 that the sheriff's office requested in next year's budget. So that will make 7. But I'm going to need to appropriate some money from fund balance to cover the cost of the vehicles. They're $210,035. And they won't be updated until next fiscal year. The equipment cost will be funded next year.
Guys, to let everybody know, the previous calendar year, so you got to almost go back a couple of years on this conversation. We ordered vehicles. They were not showing up. Okay, we were not replacing the vehicles. The sheriff's office is the main one that we do have an annual replacement plan for all of their vehicles. We replace 8 vehicles a year, and so I guess it was a couple of years ago that we literally it was taking 18 months
18 to 24 months to get
for the
one.
vehicles. So we started a plan that we ordered them real early, and then they were showing up actually by the time the budget year came around, and that actually worked this year, right?
It did. They got them September, October this year.
September, but those were ordered quite a while ago.
They were.
And so, but this one was missed by 2 or 3 months. Now, apparently, they're able to turn the vehicles around quicker. And so, this was a whole thing just attempting to make sure that we weren't running dilapidated emergency vehicles on the road. And unfortunately, it will reduce the 8. Now, again, there's some personnel requests in there for the sheriff too. So the 8 vehicles a year are based upon the amount of people that are in the sheriff's office now. If you move forward this budget amendment, then really now it's 7, right? That gets taken off of that 8 for next year. But we also have other conversations that are going to be held with the sheriff that may impact those numbers.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Request, yeah, the request for additional road patrol people will.
Have to have a
Additional
vehicle.
vehicles, yeah, okay.
Okay,
Ms. Fox.
thank you.
Now with no more business, I will say we are adjourned. Thank you.